Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Music Made Me podcast. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We truly do appreciate it. Today we're sitting down with hip hop artist TJ Hickey. He's a little different than many of the guests we have on the show because his musical aspirations didn't actually begin until college. That's when his dreams of playing professional hockey were dashed after he was cut from his college team. Since that time, he's worked at perfecting his craft and becoming successful enough to make music his career. So please enjoy our conversation with TJ Hickey. Most of the time when I'm talking to musicians, it's like, oh, there was a spark when I was 2 or 3 that kind of led me down this path. But you're different than that because when you were younger, it was more about sports, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like the most important thing that I want people to know about me. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that you become more of a, how do you help other people that are just starting out doing this? And the most important part for me is that I had no musical talent, no musical drive. I literally had no idea what I was doing. I just spent hours by myself with a laptop and headphones just writing songs. And it just slowly blossomed into this. But yeah, like you said, there was no 2 or 3-year-old, like I'm going to be a musician because both my parents were musicians type of moment. It was very forced, as I would say. I made myself do this.
Right. And with your parents and with growing up, was there music around the house? Like, did your parents listen to music, and was it a part of your life just sort of in the background as far as listening to it goes?
So, I have both my grandparents were musicians on my dad's side. So both of his parents,
Okay.
his mother played 7 musical instruments,
Oh,
and
wow.
his father sang in the church down the street where we grew up. But they always say that music kind of skips a generation.
Yeah.
And so my parents, no, music was not a big thing in my household. We'd go up and we'd see my grandfather sing, and we'd like playing the piano and stuff like that, just kind of casually. But I wasn't drawn to it. It wasn't something that interested me, and it definitely wasn't pushed in my household as something to do. It was very much a shock for me to look back, and I'm sure it was for my parents too when I first started doing this.
And back in your early days, it was more the 90s rock that you were listening to, right?
Yeah, I was listening to 90s rock. My dad was a really big Beatles fan, so I really listened to, like, if we went to hockey games or football games, he was always listening to the Beatles. And then it's funny because when I became like 13, 14, 15, rap was like really starting to like take over, and G Unit and Lloyd Banks and Eminem were starting to come out, and I used to make him listen to it. And before you know it, he'd be asking me to put on like some of the Lloyd Banks and G Unit songs because he started to like them too. So it was kind of we started with the Beatles, and then we got into rap when it became a little bit more popular.
Right. And obviously now you have a voice, you can sing. And so back then when you were listening to that 90s rock, would you sing along? Like, did you know that you could sort of carry a tune back then at least, or was that not even on your radar?
No, that was definitely not on my. I didn't know I could. I didn't know I could do any of this back then. Obviously, I used to like to sing along like 2 rap songs, and again, I definitely didn't know I could sing, and I really don't know how to get my vocals. How do I say this? Like, you can't be like, hey, go sing in this key or sing here. Like, I have to do it over and over again until it sounds right. Like, I have a
Oh,
good
okay.
ear, but I don't actually have like the vocal coaching to like actually go to, right away. I have to sit there and play with it for hours. So I don't think I've ever tried to sing. And early on in my career, I was only rapping. I had no idea what I was capable of doing, but definitely listening to that music and kind of, you look back at it and you're like, all right, a lot of these guys aren't great singers. They just are great writers, or they have this kind of character in their voice. And I think that was kind of some of the early things that I picked up on, is that character, rather than trying to be, the next Justin Bieber, is to have a bravado, if you will.
Right. And growing up, you moved around quite a bit, right?
I moved once,
Okay.
but we did summers down the Cape. I went to 3 different high schools, so I
Right.
kind of moved around. My family only moved once,
Oh,
but
okay.
I was never in one spot for more than 4 or 5 years at a time. It's just kind of how my life went.
And how did that go? Like, why did you attend 3 different high schools if you weren't moving around areas?
So it's funny because I think you hear the story, that the success story all the time of the kid in the poor community, and he kind of comes up and makes something out of himself. And I was more of the opposite. So my parents, we didn't have a lot growing up. In fact, maybe when I was 10, 15, we didn't have much before that. And, but I was surrounded by all of that. So I was seen as kind of a kid who had two loving parents. I had a house, we had, a car and a garage, which was a big deal in the city.
Right.
And I was a good athlete. So they tried to push me into these prep schools. So when I was 13, I went to my first prep school, and I went from kind of the kid who had money in the city surrounded by poor kids to, wait, you have no money, you're going to prep school with even really rich kids. And so I didn't really belong there either. I was kind of I was too soft for the city kids and too city for the prep school kids. So my family finally moved when I was about 17 to Winchester, Mass, which is about 7 miles north of where I grew up. And I went to high school there, and I only went to high school there for a year and a half because it was half my junior year and my senior year. And then we had decisions to make about where I was going to go to college. So
Mm-hmm.
I committed to this school called Holy Cross in Worcester. And they made me do a postgraduate year. So that's like a 13th year of high school. And then they decommitted me. So I ended up going to Union College. I went to Union College for a year, but I was cut 6 months into my hockey career there. So I transferred again and went to Trinity College. And honestly, that was way too fratty and preppy for me too. So I actually spent most of my time, like my actual physical time, UMass Amherst. And that's where, most of my friends that I'm still friends with today, my two roommates right now, went to school there. So I've really kind of had an interesting story because I was never really a part of one community where you can kind of say, TJ Hickey's this guy all the way through. I was always moving, which was hard, but it was great because it gave me a lot of different perspectives and I became a chameleon with who I was hanging out with. I could be the
Right.
city kid, or I could be the preppy kid, or I learned to wear a lot of different hats in all those years.
And do you think that is the reason that in your music you don't like to pick a lane? You don't like to be one thing? Is it because when you were growing up you had to be so many different things and you've taken that over into your musical career?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny too, because when someone says like, what's your best song or what's your favorite song, you kind of have to know your audience and who you're showing it to.
Right.
And when I first started making music, I was kind of like the dark urban sound. And then that was too tough, or that was too hard for kind of like the prep school kids. So I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll start to make some pop music. And then you're constantly having that battle, right? Because then you're in the city kids like, oh, he went pop. And it was one of those things where I was like, I want to be both. I want to have like kind of like those both lanes, which I think, ultimately hurt me because I don't really have a brand. Like, who is TJ Hickey? What kind of music does he make? What's his sound? What's his brand? I
Yeah.
don't think I have one of those. So when I was talking to labels early on, and I haven't talked to a label in 7 or 8 years, but they were like, who are you? Like, what's your identity? And I was like, I don't have one. Like, why do you need me to be one thing if you can make all kinds of different genres of music? And Drake was always kind of like my favorite artist growing up. And I watched him kind of be on the charts for an R&B song, be on the charts for a pop song, be on the charts for a hip hop song. And
Yeah.
he was like the first artist that I kind of like grew with, if you will, where he was first coming out with So Far Gone. And we were playing in the high school, in the locker room and stuff. And then you just watched him kind of do Hotline Bling, and you're like, all right, well, you don't have to pick a lane. You can kind of do a lot of this stuff. So I think it was my upbringing, and I think it was kind of who, that genre of music, or those first couple artists that were singing and rapping at the same time.
Right. And now let's go back to high school because that's when you first started sort of messing around with music, right?
So I was really late in high school, but I wouldn't even say I was messing around with music. So how I actually started to create music was I did it as a joke. I used to make raps about kids in my team in the locker room. So I would literally just do like, not like a freestyle, but like we'd play a beat, and I would just go around and just kind of like make fun of everyone in the locker room, like use their name and rhyme it.
Oh, okay.
And I did that for like my last two high school hockey teams. A couple of my friends were trying music. I was never really involved. In fact, they used to like be a band, and I'd sit outside and I'd be so bored, and I would write raps to their like songs, you know what I mean? So I never like actually like wasn't a part of the band, but I used to just go make fun of them with that. So I always did it as like a joke. And then when I got cut from unions, when I really started to take it, I don't want to say seriously then, but I had so much free time. I went from someone who was constantly doing sports. I had 6 a.m. lifts, and you have class, and you have your team meeting, and you'd be traveling. And so I had all this, all of a sudden that was gone, like a blink of an eye. And I had so much time on my hands. So I started to just write songs over and over again. And, there's probably thousands of songs that I've written that I've never even recorded. But like, it was one of those things. I kind of fell in love with the process of it. And it's funny now because so at Union, all the hockey guys had a lot of singles. We all like lived on the same floor.
Oh,
And I've
okay.
gotten DMs from people. So I could just I didn't have to worry about a roommate. I could just write kind of my own stuff, and I had my own room. So it was pretty easy to get away. And I've
Right.
had people message me saying like, hey, like you have no idea who I am, but I used to walk past your dorm room when you were a freshman and like listen to you just like trying to rap. And we were like all kind of like creeped out. It was just all these loud noises and stuff like that. And it's like, I can't believe you are where you're at from there. So it was kind of a joke. And then I had all this free time and I said, I might as well, like, I needed that spark. I lost a lot of what I thought was my identity as being an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first time, I was just a student. Like, what do you do? Like, who are you? Oh, a hockey player. Now you're just a regular student. For me, I couldn't take that much of a hit to my ego. So I really started to dive into the music and be something that I was proud of. And it took a while, but I think eventually I got comfortable enough where I have made something that I am proud of. But it took 5, 6, 7 years, especially the early years when you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah. And when did you start sort of reaching out to other people rather than just sort of sitting alone in your room doing it?
In terms of like working with other artists or
Yeah, well,
managers or
other artists and just producers, and sort of learning that side of things, and learning how to do it professionally rather than just in your bedroom. Or have you ever done that, or have you always just kind of sat there by yourself doing it?
I mean, I still sit here by myself, and now that I have, like the real technology, it's a little bit different. But I always went to studios, and it's very organic, right? So you start off in like a kind of where everyone goes as a studio, and you have an engineer, and you kind of have different engineers, and sooner or later, engineers take a liking to you. And so I've worked with kind of engineers throughout. At the beginning, it was kind of unsteady, but you get a guy that you like, and he likes you, and you kind of figure out what you're doing. And then artists are kind of like coming to the studio, but I didn't really like working with people until recently. And I think there's a lot of reasons. I think my music is pretty hard to, a lot of people brand themselves and I didn't. So who do I sound like? Who can I work with? I really didn't get along with artists. I had more of an athlete personality. I thought
Right.
artists were like really corny people because they're constantly, the ego is even bigger than an athlete, if you will. Like, this song isn't spiritual enough, and it felt forced. But if you look back at guys like, the Mike Studs of the world, the Sammy Adams of the world, they were athletes. So I think I started to, identify with them, and they started to come up. So I started to see kind of this whole genre of frat rap. I think at the beginning is what it was,
Right.
and them get success. And I think that really kind of helped me, reach out and learn. And I had some people, Louis Bell. I'm not sure if you know him. He's a Grammy nominated producer. He's from Boston. He did like my first 3, 4, 5 songs like ever, like in a real
Okay.
studio.
And so
And
how
now he
did you
works
get
with,
hooked up with him?
it was one of those like organic things where you're just kind of like, you're going to random studios, you're just meeting people. And he wasn't really a well-known person. He was working with this artist named Malfi in Boston, and Malfi was pretty big in the New England area. And you kind of just fell into it. It's a lot of like relationships. We were friends with Tyler Sagan, who played for the Bruins. And
Oh,
so
okay.
we'd go to bars and he'd be there. And it was just kind of one of those things. And he was like the first real engineer where he took that kind of singing thing to the next level, where he was like teaching me actually how to vocalize and harmonize and a lot of that stuff. And he's working with Post Malone, Justin Bieber, Selena Gomez. He's off the charts now, but he was like the first guy where I was like, okay, like we can start working with these people. And he was working with artists, right? So he was working with a lot of the bigger names in New England. And it was at first I didn't want to do it. And now I think you'll see, obviously on this album, there's a lot of features, but I think even further in 2021, there's gonna be even more features, because now it's about organically spreading the music. Before I wanted to like beat everyone, like I wanted to be better.
Right.
And now it's like, hey, like you come at you both hear the same beat, but you come at your angle, I'll come at my angle, and we'll see how it works. So it took a while, but I think eventually we got there in terms of working with other people.
And what were those early days like in reaching out to people and starting to get a foot into the industry? Like, what is that industry like to get into?
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, the
Yeah.
music industry in general is just it's really horrible, which is why those organic relationships are so important. Like me being friends with Tyler Sagan and going to bars and being seen as someone who was kind of, in the in crowd, that was easier to start talking to a Lewis Bell than it was when you're emailing Sammy Adams, or you're emailing, Tory Lanez, or what, any of these people that were kind of like coming up at that time, because they're not going to answer, they're going to charge you $10,000 or whatever it
Yep.
was. And the other part of it is you realize that artists, I don't want to say they're scared of you, but like they're very territorial, right? It's like, how many of these athlete rappers can we have in the game?
Right.
Like, so they don't want to open the door to you. And that took me a very long time to understand, because I was always wondering why people didn't want, me to go on tour with them, or they didn't want, and I considered them to be, somewhat friends.
Right.
But you realize it's a competition, and there's only, they think, and I disagree, but there's only room for a couple of people that can do this kind of stuff. So it was definitely hard at the beginning of this, and it takes, and I tell everyone this, it really just takes longevity, and you have to be able to do this for you, because if you're going to do this to get that song with that major artist, or you're going to do that song to do this to get that song to get a million plays, you're going to fail. You're going to stop at your first failure. And
Right.
I've said this multiple times. If I had zero fans, I'd still do this. Like the actual process of coming in here and just writing a song by
Yeah.
myself without anyone hearing it before it's done is kind of like my favorite thing to do. It's having the million plays and all that stuff is obviously a huge goal, but doing it, the actual process of it is my favorite part.
And coming over from sports, you're obviously a natural athlete, and in your hockey career, it was probably you had to battle a bit, but not as much as the music industry. So when you first started to think, I want to make music a career, mentally, how did you get through those first few years of grinding and getting over that self-doubt and, the anxiety that can come with that? What was that process like for you?
So it was similar to hockey. You're always the big pond, the big fish in the small pond, but then you enter the next level, right? So at hockey, if you're a big high school player, then you go to college and kind of have to start all over again.
Right.
And for me, it was the doubt. Like I fed off that. When people told me I couldn't do it, and I wasn't good enough, or I couldn't get there, that for me was like enough where I was like, okay, now I'm going to do it. And I think that was just kind of like the competitiveness that I got from sports. It's kind of mano a mano, and
Right.
music isn't really like that, but I took that mentality and brought it there. So when I first started, I had so many people making fun of me. It was, it was hard, but it was one of those things that if I didn't have that, if people kind of embraced me right at the beginning, I'm not even sure I'd still be doing it, because as soon as people didn't think I could do it is when I wanted to do it even more.
Oh, okay.
Um,
So it wasn't like a crippling fear that you would get. It was a
Sometimes,
motivating.
right? Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're just like, what am I doing? But and I tell this when someone, DMs me and says like, hey, how do I start this? Or do you have any advice for upcoming? It's like, you have to do this for you, because if you're doing this for other people, or you're doing this for the clout, when someone, makes fun of you, or someone tells you you suck, or whatever it is, you're going to stop. And that's more embarrassing than sticking with it. And, at the end of the day, you cannot like my music, but you can't take away the fact that for 7 years, I've been doing this, and I've only gone, up. And that's only because I did this for me. I didn't do this for, to please everyone. I actually did it because it was something that I enjoyed to do, which is why I call the album a different kind of hobby. I mean, it becomes some people golf, some people swim, some people paint, some people, and it's really just about exercising like your own happiness. And that's what music is at the end of the day. Like, it's an outlet. I get to become a different character every time I find a beat and write a song. I'm writing a movie script in my art. So it was definitely one of those things that it's crippling sometimes, but I think at the end of the day, it really did fuel me.
And how has your writing evolved since the beginning? Because your last couple of albums have really focused on that drive and that determination and overcoming the obstacles. Was that different than how you were writing, say, in your dorm room or over the first couple of years and those hundreds of songs, that you have strewn about?
So I think sonically my writing has changed because I know kind of vocally where I can go. So when you're writing in terms of like, I'm not always trying to rap now. I'm always trying to be as like creative as I can on the record. But in
Right.
terms of content, in terms of theme, the only thing I think would change, I mean, I still have my struggles. I don't sit here and say like I'm the best artist and I'm the biggest and I'm
Yeah.
rich and famous, right? So you're always still trying to prove that to people. And that's obviously a huge theme. But now I feel like I've gotten more creative where I like to tell stories, but most importantly, I think I have a little bit more to brag about. I think I actually have like I'm still doing what you told me I couldn't do. And that's come out
Right.
more and more in the music, I think, than it ever has. Before it was, you're misunderstood. But it depends on the day. It depends, how I feel. You can have a great year, but 150 days of that year, you might be down. You just not really acknowledging what you're doing. So sonically it's changed because I think I'm trying to really get out of this whole he's just a rapper box, even though I
Right.
thought I've done that by now, but I think for the most part you still have to do it every day. And then a little bit more of like this bravado, and especially working with like other people, I think you become more competitive on the record too. So
Right.
it depends on the day, it depends on the record, but I think I have a little bit more confidence in a lot of the records and the writing.
Yeah, and all the steps you've taken, being able to go out on tour, your albums that you drop, has there ever been a point where you've had the realization that, oh, this is a career for me now? Or have you had that realization yet? Or is it a continual fight to ensure that this will be a career for you?
It's a continual fight. I mean, you have such good days and bad days in this industry that like some days you don't want. I don't think I'll ever stop making music. So I don't say I would give up on that, but like give up trying to reach that next level because it's so much more than just making a song and throwing it on the internet. It's just unfortunately like there's just so many factors that go into it, good and bad.
Hmm.
But I've always wanted to be a songwriter. That's always been my goal. But it's kind of like a hockey player that wants to be a coach. You have to
Right.
be the player before you can be the coach. So I've always used this. Like, listen, I think I'm my biggest fan and I'll always create music, but I think my gift is my ability to write for Meek Mill and then write for Kenny Chesney. And I think that's pretty much unheard of for a writer to be able to do that, at least to my knowledge. So I think that versatility, because I don't think I'm the best rapper. I don't think I'm the best singer. I don't think I make the best songs, but I do think that my writing and my versatility is not uncomparable, but I think I'm a step ahead of where most people are at. So if you're talking about career wise and where I want to go, that's absolutely a huge motivation for me. But you have to continue. You have to build that portfolio, right? You can't just all of a
Hmm.
sudden say, "Hey, I want to go coach the Bruins." It's like, okay, well, you have to be a player. You got to do all this. So I'm just kind of going through that steps and trying to release the best music I can. But at the end of the day, being a writer is really what I want to do.
And how long did it take you to switch from the mentality of TJ the athlete to TJ the musician? Or was it pretty quick after you got cut and sort of started to do the writing and the recording?
In terms of my own mental space, I don't know if that I've ever left that like TJ Hickey, the athlete.
Right.
But I've definitely realized that people see me as TJ Hickey, the artist, rather than the athlete now, just because so much time has passed.
Yeah.
I was cut in 2012, so you're still a hockey player for years. Like people still see you in that capacity, but for the most part, I think the artist has taken over that, which is kind of weird for me. I know that I've been doing this for a long time, but hockey's your entire life, and most of your relationships where you live are through that. They're not through music.
Right.
But there, yeah, I mean, over time, you slowly become TJ Hickey, the rapper, singer, whatever you want to call me, and not the athlete. And it's been surreal, but I don't think my attitude has changed. I've always said I don't really like have that artist attitude. I'm more of just like a locker room guy than I am, an artsy guy. So I think I've kept that same mentality all the way through.
And after getting cut, like you mentioned, the hit to your ego and starting music, sort of because of that ego and wanting to be successful at something. But after being cut and feeling so down because your identity was being a hockey player, have you changed a bit in not getting too wrapped up in setting your identity in one phase, like setting it too much as I'm a musician, that's what I am, just in case that does go away one day and you don't want to basically be torn down because that was your identity?
Right. So you know what all this has really given me the perspective on, and identity is one thing, because you're right, it eventually will end. But it was more about the fact that I overcame the obstacles to get to this level of success. Now, however
Right.
big or small it is, I think I took it, and that's what I say, like, how do you know you made it? I think I took it to places that people didn't think I could take it. And that's actually a lyric and some things I had to say off the album.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of identity, it's like more of like, okay, TJ Hickey is the person that overcame obstacles rather than the artist. And I think that's something that I've always wanted to overcome. Like, I'll get the job done, whatever it is. If we're going ice fishing, that's just, and because of hockey and because of Doubters and music, I feel like that's where I'm at in life. But most importantly, I think the perception it gave me, and I tell this to a lot of people, is that, and people I don't want to say make fun of me, but they laugh at me for it. When I've slowly realized that I've been here long enough where I've become more of a role model in terms of starting out for starting out musicians, more than I am like a celebrity walking down the street. And
Right.
I mean it more like, how did you get where you are, rather than, dude, like, you're so awesome, you should get more well known. Those, like, that's how the DMs have changed over the time. But this is really giving me the perception to, if your friends are trying something, if someone's trying a new company, I think people suppress their dreams and their goals so much that when they see other people chasing it, they're automatically putting them down. At least that's the attitude here in New England. And I've
Right.
learned to do the exact opposite. If you're looking at my Instagram, I'm constantly just like, people are like, hey, I'm starting a new company. Do you want to, be the brand ambassador? It's like, no, but I'll put you on my Instagram. Like, I'll put you up, because I never got those chances. And someone who's trying something new or different that you don't see them as, and that's like, if one of my friends said today, I'm just going to go be a doctor, old me would be like, dude, you're not a doctor. Like, you have no medical, like, you have to go to medical school. Like, you have no drive, whatever I would say. Doing music and all these years of being told that I couldn't do it, now I would be like this. I'm with you. Like, what do you need? How can I help? And that's really what that perception of starting music and losing my identity and gaining a new one has done, is never push anyone down on their goals or their dreams. If they're starting a company, if they're going to be a lawyer, whatever they're going to do, just support them. Because when I was down and I was first starting this and people would tell me I couldn't do it, I would have liked to hear, hey man, like, how can I help? And that's how you create the most promoted relationships as well too. So that's definitely the biggest perspective I've taken from this.
And now let's talk about the new album. When did you decide to start compiling the material for this one?
So, the reason it's 31 songs is because like 85% of it was done in right here, like right in my like walk-in closet. And I could have filed it down, but I said to myself, like, all those songs should be together.
Right.
Like 3, 4, 5 of them, like the All on Me, Jokes on You. There's probably like three or four of them that they were done before, like they were already going to be on the album.
Oh, okay.
And then COVID hit, and then it was
Yeah.
like, all right, it's just me. And it wasn't even done on this microphone. I don't think one song from the album was done on this microphone. I was all on $100 microphone and GarageBand and my old new computer and everything. It was all done on old stuff. And I was like, these songs all like deserve to be on the project. So I would say for the most part, this was all done this year. And like, COVID hit in March or April, and I literally just sat in my room and just wrote and recorded songs. It was my first time ever recording myself. I did GarageBand stuff, but I would always go to a real studio to make the song and work with an engineer. So it
Right.
was my first time ever working by myself, and you can hear some of the quality on the songs isn't as good as probably some of the others, but they all felt like they needed, because you could hear them get better as I got used to recording myself a little bit more, if you knew the chronological order of them. So
Right.
I'd say probably honestly, like all of 2020 is when 95% of that music was made.
Well, and how many songs have you written over that time? Like 31 on the album, but how many over the
Yeah.
past year have you actually written, do you think?
I mean, written probably like 100, 150, recorded probably like 55, 60. What's funny is like when I record the song, and again, I always said I'm my biggest fan. Like I usually want to release it, and I need like someone to be like, "Hey, like don't release this," because I'm like, you like learn to like respect the song. So you're like, I want the world to know, even if one person likes it. But unfortunately, I couldn't make it anything longer than 31. So I did make a decision to cut, 15, 10 of them, whatever it was.
And is that the great thing about these days in releasing songs, in that you can release this album now, but then those, say, 15 that you cut over the next year, you can just throw them out one at a time if you want. You don't have to wait till you have an album, or just say, oh, I'm not going to release those because I wasn't able to on this album, so now they're just gone.
Yeah, it is the best part. And I'm sure some of them will come out because, over time you start to like songs even more or
Mhm.
less. But I think there's a couple of the songs I was actually just listening to a couple where I was like, I don't know. I think these could, I think fans would like them. But I grew up on albums. So
Right.
if you look at the album for what it was, I'd say 20 of the songs were released, in the weeks coming up to the album, like every single Friday. But I wanted to wrap them up because first of all, people miss singles, right? You don't
Mhm.
sitting there every Friday looking for a TJ Hickey song every single week. And so I think a lot of people miss them, and if they get listened to, all together, it's easier for people to understand the story, understand the versatility versus just single, 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 single. So
Right.
I think it's cool that you get to release a single, but I did want to wrap it up and to be an album, to me more of like a cohesive project rather than just releasing a single every week.
And do you like sort of the roughness of the ones that you recorded yourself? Or do you think in the future, when we're back to a little bit of normal, you'll maybe re record those and re release them?
I don't think I'd re-record them, but there are records that I wish I could have done in a real studio with a real engineer. You always wonder like what a record could have been had you done it, with professional equipment, professional people helping you do it, and not just, me in a walk-in closet with $100 microphone. Even just
Yeah.
having, this microphone, which isn't, that much more than $100, but just having that kind of like I didn't have auto tune. I didn't have any of those things. I just had GarageBand. So I'm trying to hear my own pitch and stuff like that. And when you're always experimenting, I always say like on every song I'm experimenting. I don't have a comfort zone with the song. So there are some of those that are raw, but I do think there is a little bit to it to say, hey, I recorded this for $100 in my room rather than, the $5,000 studio microphone. But I don't think I'll re-record them, and that's a problem I always have, is because I think I could write a song. So you fall in love with new stuff all the time. Like going back and actually reworking a song is one of the hardest things I have to do, because a new idea pops up, a new beat you like, whatever it is, it's really hard to go back.
Right. And you talk about the writing. Have you taken steps in writing for other people at this point?
So I was doing a lot of that before COVID. I've written a couple of like my friends' songs. I've co-written with a couple of people. I think I'm just starting to get into that because I was really so focused on me that it's so hard to give up one of like songs that I like and
Right.
so, like ship it off. Like I'm getting closer to that, but like I almost need to go in with like the mind state of like, hey, this isn't for me, so like don't fall in love with it right away, because I
Right.
have written a couple songs for some people and I belong to a couple like branches of labels as a writer, but I always just like the song myself and want to record it. So but I am starting to, especially since this album is out, starting to do more of that.
And you talk about the steps to do it and equating it to hockey, and you're not just going to jump from the minor leagues to the pros. So what is it like in the writing world as opposed to the music world, in breaking into it and making those connections and becoming respected within that area?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not there yet. I don't think I have that book of songwriting. What I don't think I could do, and I think a lot of writers do this, is they all kind of like get together, like a group of 4 or 5 writers, and write a song together.
Yeah.
I don't think I can do that.
Right.
I think I work better by myself. And I don't want to be arguing with people over like what lyric goes here and stuff like that. Now, when it comes to like arrangement, I think, you can ship a verse and a hook off to someone and they can kind of play with it and take what they want from it. But in terms of like sitting there and collaborating, I don't think I could do that part of it. So I'm not in the songwriting world, but I can tell you that I've already had conversations with a lot of people that have kind of been my mentors throughout the ride. Sammy Adams is a great example of just trying to like navigate from being an artist to being a writer, and those relationships, those managers, those people that are going to go pitch those songs to those bigger artists. So I'm just starting to have those conversations, but I honestly just got all this mic equipment and I want to see, what I can make for myself before I really commit to that.
Right. Yeah. Is that the future for you right now? Now that you can basically sit in your walk-in closet and record yourself, is that the future
Yeah.
for you?
I already have like 15 songs just all recorded, and I've already like shipped them off to some engineers to try to get them, all done right, because yeah, it's like getting a brand new toy. Now I've realized what other people have been using, and I'm like, wow, if I had this, I wonder how different some of the songs in the album could have sounded. But it's all it just takes time to like actually get used to recording yourself and knowing what it's going to sound like once it's, has a little EQ or has some reverb or whatever the sound you're going for. It just takes a little bit to get used to it. And I feel like honestly, just the last like 2 weeks, I've really gotten into a pocket here where like I'm doing things faster and I'm realizing, what I'm capable of doing.
And I read in an interview, you said you don't really like to look back at where you've come from. You always just like to look ahead. But when you do sort of reflect on where you are right now, are you pretty proud of what you've been able to do?
It's funny that you said that because I just wrote a song about that. Gradual progress is so hard to be proud of. And I don't mean that in like a bad way. It's like, for me, it's like, okay, if you told me 10 years ago that I'd be doing this at all, I'd say you're crazy. If you told me 5 years ago that I'd be where I'm at right now, I'd say you're crazy. And those are two different worlds. 5 years ago, I never thought I'd be making a single song. Like I thought I was going to be a hockey player and that was going to be that. And then 5 years ago, when I started, if you told me I'd be working with, Sammy Adams and Sage the Geminis and all these people, I'd be like, there's no way I'm going to get there. So to answer your question, I do think I'm proud of where I'm at. I always, as you know, I always want more. And it's funny when you get a little bit of success, all you want is more of it.
Yeah.
And when it goes away, even temporarily, like you can't even handle it. But yeah, I think I am proud. I think I've done what I said I was going to do. And I think if I stopped now, I think I've got it to a place where I'm at least respected. Again, you don't have to like the music. And I've always said that you don't have to like every single one of my songs. You don't have to like any of my songs, but you have to respect the fact that for 7 years, I've continued to do this and I've taken it to places, around the country and musically had millions of plays, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I do think I'm proud of where I'm at. And now I want to, not only write for other people, and I've actually just wrote for a group in Georgia and we're going down to do a video, but I want to help those people that are just starting out because no one helped me when I started. I remember
Right.
I would spend hours sending music to blogs, managers, like 50 emails a day, just being like, hey, check out my new song, post this. And no one ever posted a thing. No one ever reached out. And now, I think people don't, I don't want people to think I'm Hollywood, but most importantly, I actually want to help people that are, good people, but have their intentions to make music and need that person to be like, hey, what do you think of this? And what do you think of that? And what should I do? I'm really going to make an effort to try to help some of those younger guys.
Well, that's awesome because, yeah, like you say, in the music industry, it's pretty cutthroat. So I don't know if you see many of the guys like you who are willing to help others, maybe in spite of themselves. So it's
Yeah,
awesome to
there's
see.
there's not. Yeah, there's not. And again, I can only help so much. I don't think I'm not going to fix everyone's problems, but even just that, like, hey man, keep going, or that's something I never got, and I didn't need it. But there are a lot of people that do need it. Like it does feel good, but I think some people would give up if they didn't get that, and I think it's important that there's all kinds of stories where you hear artists who's like, in 2017, I was going to give up. And now they're like some of the biggest artists in the world because they
Yeah.
didn't have that person to be like, no, like you're good, just keep going. So you do your best to work with people, but that's something I'm going to make a conscious conscious effort towards.
Awesome. Well, you know what? Keep it up. Keep the music coming. And yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us and tell us your journey a bit.
No, thank you. I think it's important for guys like you that get to know the artist behind the music, right? And I
Yeah.
think, when I watch an interview or of one of my artists, I like the person more because you're actually seeing kind of who they are before it. So I think it's, guys like you that are giving, us artists a platform to talk about ourselves rather than the music is the most important part about this, because you're building fans of you, not just fans of the music. And those are two different things sometimes. So no, I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you guys once again so much for listening. And thank you to TJ for sharing his story and for being someone who's supporting the younger generations of musicians. Now, please be sure you are liking, sharing, following, subscribing to us on whatever streaming platform you are listening on. It truly does help us in coming back each and every week with conversations with your favorite artists. Thank you so much once again, and we'll see you next time on The Music Made Me.